horse industry long enough, really stay, you start to realize this world doesn't just teach horsemanship, it teaches people. And not always in a gentle way. Most people outside this world see horses and think beauty, freedom, sport, tradition. People inside know something else is going on. This work asks many things of you, physically, mentally, and emotionally. And over time, it shapes who you are, whether you're intentional about it or not. People that last they weren't protected from difficulty. They were shaped by it. Not hardened, not bitter, and not burnt out. I like the term forged because we're in this game together. And many of the times I'm working with horseshoers, and there's a lot too when you're forging steel. You're building things. Yeah, you go back to the fire a lot, but once you're done, that shoe's shaped up real nice to fit on that foot. You look at different disciplines, different backgrounds, and different ambitions, but the same pattern shows up again and again. The people who become truly capable, they didn't have a smoother path. Oftentimes they've learned to endure through a path that wasn't very fun. Maybe they were a colt starter. Maybe you start out in the barn sweeping and picking up poop, or picking up shit, I guess let's say, right? And cleaning those stalls. That's where it all began. They learned how to stay present when things were uncomfortable, how to remain curious when confidence took a hit, how to keep showing up when work asked more than they expected. Horses are central to this for a reason, not because they're beautiful, though they are, not because they're impressive, though they can be, but because they're honest. Honest as a quiet day, honest as a quiet moment. They just are honest. They don't respond to surface level effort. They don't reward shortcuts. They don't care about how badly you want an outcome. You got to figure out how to ask them for that outcome. They respond to preparation, clarity, consistency over time. When something goes wrong, and it will, there's nowhere to hide. Pressure either builds capacity or it exposes that fragility. I've watched people be forged by injury, by horses that didn't come easily, by seasons that stripped away momentum and forced a return to fundamentals. Those moments rarely feel like progress at the time, but they are the moments where real capability is built. Not talent, not motivation, but capacity. Along the way, for all of us, there's going to be people that are a part of that as far as the horses too, and you're going to see things, experience things, and then be able to critically put that together. And one of the stories that just really shaped me, and it's been with me for pretty close to 25 years. I met my mentor. His name is Dr. Cliff Honus. He owns Texas Equine in down by Houston, Texas, College Station, actually. And I was in vet school and, just kind of trying to figure my stuff out. And I was on an externship and went there, and he was on surgery, and he was a young guy. He was only 4 or 5 years into practice, and had been, he's their young surgeon and up and coming. And inside that time, I spent day after day with him for 4 weeks, and we did emergencies together, all the things. And I stayed at Texas A&M and watched what was going on. And through that, Cliff just really started to shape me, and I didn't even realize what was happening. And to this day, he still tells me this story, and I laugh because I just told the intern and my student the other day the same story. He said, Chad, we think that in veterinary medicine, we have all these letters behind our names, and we're doctor this, and we're board certified that, and we've had all these academic challenges, and we're 4.0 as far as our grade point, and all these things. But he said, at the end of the day, they don't really care about that. I'll tell you what they do care about is how much you care. He said, so I'm going to tell you this, and hopefully you won't forget it, but nobody really cares how much you know, but dang sure they do care how much you care, and they're going to remember that, and just carry that with you. I think that weaves into this whole thing, like when I look back on that, that's 33 years ago, I was still in vet school, and it just resonated with me, and it's still valuable today. I still share it at least once a week. I know sometimes my people are probably tired of hearing it, but we talk about it because it is a true value, and I think it's really helped me develop who I was going to be. If you're early in this industry, this can feel discouraging. If you're deep into it, it can feel real familiar. Difficulty is not a signal that you don't belong here. It's often motivation to grow. This podcast begins here, where comfort stops working and capability starts being forged. Capability doesn't mean much until it's tested. And eventually, if you stay at the work, it always is. There comes a moment where you're no longer deciding what you prefer, you're deciding what you stand for. In the horse world, moments don't arrive cleanly, they show up quietly. A horse is almost right, a timeline that feels too tight, a decision that would be easier if someone else made it for you. I think we've all been there. We've all felt that before. Horses expose that. I've watched veterinarians navigating competing pressures with no perfect answer. Trainers decide whether to push forward or pull back when momentum is strong. Owners choose between ambition and stewardship. Farriers make subtle adjustments that determine whether a horse holds up or it doesn't. From the outside, these moments look small. Inside, they're pretty heavy. I think we've all felt that before for sure. Because whatever you choose, the consequences, they don't disappear. Sometimes they're good. Sometimes there are things that they bring us up, things where we need to improve. They just arrive later, right? Like you're just there. This is where the system matters. Endure the pressure long enough to think clearly. Adapt when a plan no longer matches reality. Advance only when standards are still intact. Miss one of these steps, you'll pay for it later. Horses are unforgiving here. They don't respond to good intentions. They respond to correct decisions repeated over time. Sort of like people. People tend to be a little bit confusing sometimes because we have all the different emotions. Horses don't have those emotions. They're just strictly with us in that moment. Almost right, still wrong. Experience teaches you to respect that line. Not out of fear, but out of understanding. Okay, second story I'm going to talk about it's going to be southern part of the United States too, and it's going to have to do with like almost like that stone that you think about, like when you put it in a polisher, like one of those tumblers, right? Like to take the edges off of them. And I was very fortunate through my life, got into school right away to the school that I applied to for undergraduate. I was able to get into vet school the very first time I applied. And then I was able to, by as much luck as anything, get into an internship. And that internship really changed my life and shaped things around. And then I was able to get into a very nice practice in Calgary, Alberta, and go to work for a company called Moore and Company. Work for them, and really good set of veterinarians, and just had a high quality, and was able to mentor with them. And I decided to move down to Texas to take a job there, or sorry, Oklahoma, almost into Texas, about 30 miles from the Texas border. And I went to work for a veterinarian. His name was David McCarroll, and he was the first person. Maybe there were other ones, but maybe I was so arrogant, I just didn't see it. But boy, when I showed up there, he really started honing on me right away, that I needed to change some things. And he didn't always have the nicest delivery, but maybe that's what I needed, right? And he kind of leveled me up a few times, in the sort of like when you're colt starting, right? Like, and you got to start a colt and they buck you off, you need to get back on. And I can just remember wanting him to appreciate me and to think that I was something special. And he did, but he sure wasn't afraid to like sort of shape that, forge that piece of steel. And he would always come back with some things that I needed to do better. And and the only way I ever knew, I think what I'm coming from this is that the only way I knew that he was happy with me is when he wasn't yelling at me. And he was always, it felt like every day he had to yell at me a little bit. But then eventually I figured it out. I was like, he's not talking to me today. And I was like, dang, I must be doing something right. And I think that's that quietness we were talking about before, that sharpness. We tend to want to hear the noise, but with David, it was more of, like, hey, if you're not doing the thing I need you to do, and you're not becoming better at this and looking after these clients that you're lucky enough to have, because I always just thought, I was like, oh, they just, even though Cliff had told me the story before, I thought I'm a doctor and I really know what I'm doing, and people have come to me because I'm smart. And David was just hammering that home again. He's like, no, you're very lucky to work for them, and you should respect that relationship. And he just really helped me with that as we were going along. This podcast is built around people who learned how to make those calls, not perfectly, not without doubt, but honestly. They don't just survive pressure, they're strengthened by it. That's anti-fragile. Sort of a modern term, but it's a really nice one. I like how it fits. It's got a bit of that old school feel, but yet it sort of brings us to this modern place. If you stay in the work long enough, if you endure, adapt, and advance without cutting corners, something subtle but permanent happens. Your standards start to sharpen. It's another one of those sort of terms that comes from this horse industry, when you've got a sharp attitude or whatever. Sometimes that's taken as negative, and we're not going to use that at all here. Sharp means, we'll see as we go through this, you stop chasing shortcuts. You stop being impressed by noise. You stop confusing motion with progress. Because you've seen what it actually takes to keep a horse around, a career intact, yourself steady under pressure. Horses don't reward intensity and burst. They reward sharpness, attention to detail, daily execution, and respect for fundamentals. Staying sharp is not loud, it's ready. Once you live that way with horses, it follows you everywhere. Into business, leadership, relationships, just plain old life, just living every day. You become harder to knock off your center, not because life gets easier, but because your standards don't disappear when it doesn't, because it won't. There's gonna be some challenges, and it's gonna be worth it. This podcast exists to explore that way of living through conversations with people across the equine industry and beyond it. Veterinarians, trainers, riders, farriers, competitors across all events, dressage, jumping, rodeo, any of those labels that fit within our industry. People at the top of their game, not because they avoided pressure, but because they were shaped by it. We'll talk about the horses that made them, the mistakes that taught them, the decisions that changed their trajectory, and that what moments experiences teach, not just about horses, but about building a life. This isn't a podcast about horses being pretty. It's about people who work with them, learn things that apply everywhere else. It's for people who sense there's more in them and are willing to step it up. Not recklessly, not loudly, but differently, because it's worth it. And so are you. Hey, this podcast is new. You can sure help us out today if you can leave us a rating and a review and forward it to one friend. Really appreciate you listening to us, and I look forward to catching up again.